My name is Cassian Doyle. I'm 33 and I work as an environmental engineer in Oregon. People see me now, clean house, steady job, calm voice, and they assume I've always had it together. But if they looked closer, if they saw beneath the surface, they'd find something different entirely. They'd see a boy who used to flinch at slammed doors, who learned to measure a person's mood by the weight of their footsteps, who once made a promise to two younger brothers that he would never let them live the life he did. I come from a town you won't find in any travel guide, tucked behind rows of gray hills and rusted fences, a place where dreams rust faster than cars and silence carries more weight than words. That's where I grew up, in the hollow shell of a home, with parents who turned their bitterness into weapons and used them freely. I survived because I had to, because Declan and Avery needed me, and because I believed, somehow, that life could still change. But what I didn't know was that the worst betrayal was still waiting, not in childhood, but long after I'd built something that looked like peace. This story isn't just about pain or escape. It's about what happens when everything you built on hope is yanked out from under you by the very people you swore you'd left behind. So before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, like something was about to crack wide open. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to hear your story too. My name is Cassian Doyle. I'm 33, and I work as an environmental engineer in Oregon. People see me now and think I've had it easy. But behind this calm life is a boy who grew up fearing footsteps in the hallway, who learned to read the wind before he learned to ride a bike. I was born in a town you wouldn't find unless you were lost, Brickmill, Idaho. One road in, one road out, and nothing but dying pine trees and frozen dirt in between. My parents, Ronan and Meredith, never expected to raise a family. They got pregnant with me at 19, married at 20, and started falling apart shortly after. Dad used to be a welder before the mill closed. After that, he spent most of his time on the porch with a beer and a busted radio playing the same four country songs. Mom worked part-time at the diner when she felt like it, but mostly she floated through the house like a ghost, chain-smoking menthols and watching game shows like she was waiting for her life to start. I had two siblings, Corwin and Isolde. Corwin, my younger brother, was quiet, always drawing with stubby pencils on scraps of junk mail. He barely spoke above a whisper. Isolde, the baby, had a weak immune system and was in and out of the clinic every few weeks. She was sunshine in a storm, always trying to make things better, even when she didn't have the strength to get off the couch. I was the oldest, the buffer, the one who took the blows, literal and not, so they wouldn't have to. Our house was always cold in winter, suffocating in summer, and loud when it shouldn't be. My father had a temper. I knew that better than anyone. The floorboards in the hallway creaked in a pattern. When I heard that creak, I'd move fast, pull Corwin under the bed, hide Isolde in the closet with a flashlight and her inhaler, and brace myself. My mother never stepped in. She'd sit there smoking, eyes vacant, like she was watching a movie she'd seen too many times. When I was 12, I started working, shoveling snow, raking leaves, cleaning up at the gas station. I'd stash every dollar I earned in a tin lunchbox under the porch, right behind the rusted generator. That money wasn't for candy or games. It was my escape fund. I didn't know where I'd go, but I knew I had to get out. School was my only sanctuary. I'd sit in the back, head down, hoping nobody noticed the bruises or the fact that I wore the same jeans 4 days in a row. Miss Palmer, my 8th grade science teacher, was the first person who saw something in me. She pulled me aside one day and said, "You've got a mind that doesn't belong here, Cass. Don't let this place cage it." That stuck with me. I started reading everything I could get my hands on, old textbooks, library books, even the manual for the busted water heater. I got obsessed with how things worked, especially the earth. Rocks, soil, rivers, they made sense in a way people didn't. I knew how they formed, what pressure did to them, how long it took to turn something soft into something unbreakable. When I turned 17, I applied for every scholarship I could find. I stayed up until 2 a.m. filling out forms on the library computer, rewriting essays, mailing applications. My guidance counselor laughed when I told him I was applying to the University of Washington. "Kids like you don't end up there," he said. I didn't respond. A month later, I got the acceptance letter. Full ride. Environmental engineering. The day it arrived, I walked it home like it was made of glass. I showed it to my mother. She grunted. My father said, "Don't think you're better than us, boy." I didn't bother arguing. I packed my things that night. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, Isolde's favorite dog-eared copy of A Wrinkle in Time, and that tin lunchbox of cash. Isolde cried when I hugged her. Corwin just looked at me with those big, silent eyes like he already knew we wouldn't see each other again for a long time. I took the bus out of Brickmill at sunrise. The windows were foggy, and the heater barely worked, but I didn't care. I watched the trees fade into hills and the sky stretch wider than I'd ever seen. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just sat there, $27 in my pocket, and told myself over and over, "You're not going back." Not for holidays, not for apologies, not for anything. That was 15 years ago. I haven't set foot in Brickmill since. I send money to Corwin when I can. Isolde passed when she was 14, just before I started college. Pneumonia. The clinic didn't catch it in time. My father didn't tell me until 2 weeks after her funeral. "Figured you were too busy being important to come home," he said. I hung up and didn't call back. My mother left a voicemail once, around Christmas, something about being sorry and needing help. I never returned the call. I built a life here, a quiet one. I have an apartment with big windows, a cat named Malloy, and a job that lets me fix things: streams, watersheds, contaminated soil. They talked about spring break plans and keg parties while I calculated how long my food stamps would last if I skipped dinner twice a week. But I didn't complain. I'd made it out, and I wasn't going to mess it up. I clung to my studies like a lifeline. Environmental engineering wasn't just a major, it was a mission. Every polluted stream I read about, every dead zone in the ocean, every oil spill and landfill problem, it all felt like proof that I'd chosen the right path. I could fix things. I couldn't save Isolde, couldn't fix Corwin's sadness or erase my father's fists, but maybe I could fix something that mattered to the world. So I worked. I sat in the front row of every class, showed up to every lab early, took notes until my hands cramped. My professors started to notice. One of them, Dr. Rios, told me during office hours, "You don't just want a career. You want redemption." She was right. I didn't want just a job. I wanted to prove that I wasn't what Brickmill tried to make me. I wanted to become someone no one would dare hit or ignore, someone who mattered. But work wasn't all I did. I had to find part-time jobs too: janitor shifts, night desk at the library, cleaning up after rich kids in frat houses that reeked of beer and cologne. I'd come home with sore arms and bleach stains on my jeans, then pull an all-nighter for a thermodynamics exam. Some nights, I slept on the floor with a hoodie rolled up under my head, too tired to climb into the bunk bed. And then, in my sophomore year, something shifted. I met her. Her name was Elowen Hart, and she had the kind of presence that made people stop mid-sentence. She was in landscape architecture, always sketching trees or rooftop gardens in the margins of her notebook. We met in a campus sustainability workshop. She noticed I corrected the professor on a runoff calculation and called me out, in a good way, after class. "You've got the quiet confidence of someone who reads manuals for fun," she said, smirking. I did. We started talking, then walking, then sitting on the lawn for hours trading stories. She grew up in San Diego, raised by her aunt, and had her own set of scars, but she wore them differently. Where I hid mine under sarcasm and silence, she wore hers like woven fabric, soft but unbreakable. Elowen was the first person who didn't make me feel like a relic from a broken past. With her, I laughed. With her, I dreamed out loud. We talked about building a solar-powered house in the woods. She wanted chickens. I wanted a greenhouse. We both wanted silence, the kind that wasn't born of fear but peace. For the first time, I saw a future that wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about building something better. But I didn't forget where I came from. I sent money home when I could. Corwin started art school in Boise with some of the help. I never told anyone, but I skipped meals so he could buy supplies. My father never called. My mother sent a letter once asking if I could co-sign for a loan. I didn't reply. I kept my focus. Elowen and I dated for 2 years. She knew my past, not all the gory details, but enough to understand the shadows I carried. She never pushed me to go back, never tried to fix me, just held space when I needed it. We made plans to move in together after graduation. I was offered a research assistant position at an environmental firm in Portland. It was everything I'd worked for. And yet, part of me kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't survive a childhood like mine without carrying a little paranoia. So when the call came from Brickmill, when my parents reached out with a proposal, I knew instinctively it wasn't good. Meredith left a voicemail, all sugar and poison. Cassian, honey, your dad and we've got an opportunity for you. A good one. It's time to think about family. I didn't listen to the rest. I played the first 15 seconds and deleted it. But Elowen heard it. She picked up my phone when it buzzed again a few nights later. I remember the look on her face when she read the transcript. She didn't ask questions, just set the phone down gently and said, "You don't owe them anything." I nodded, but something heavy settled in my chest. The next few weeks felt off. Elowen got distant. Not cold, not unkind, just quieter. I figured it was the pressure. Graduation looming, job offers, the weight of big changes. We didn't fight. We didn't break. We just frayed. And then, one day, she was gone. A note on the counter. "Cass, you're meant for something more. Don't let me hold you back. You need to heal on your own. I'll always care. No fight. No, goodbye." Just the quiet sound of a door that had already closed before I even realized it was open. And I didn't chase her. I couldn't. I sat there for hours, staring at that note. I wanted to scream, to break something, to call my father and tell him he'd won somehow. My days became routine, testing soil, analyzing runoff, presenting slides to developers who only cared about the minimum compliance. At night, I ate cheap microwave meals and stared at the ceiling, trying not to think about why I kept Elowen's note in the same box where I used to hide bruises. One morning, the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, but the area code flashed 218 Idaho. Some instinct, old and bone deep, made me pick up. It was my mother. Her voice cracked like she was faking tears, but I could tell she was sober, which was rare. She started talking about an old family friend, about opportunity, about how things could finally be good for everyone. I tuned out until she said the words, "It's a marriage arrangement, Cassian. Nothing weird. Just a favor that would help us all." I laughed, out loud. Then I asked if she was high. She snapped, said I was selfish, that I owed them. I hung up. I didn't call back. But something lingered in my chest, unease, maybe curiosity, maybe something darker. A week later, my father called. Ronan never used a phone unless someone was bleeding. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He got straight to the point. "The girl's name is Thalassa Quinn. Her dad and I worked together back in the day. She's paralyzed from the waist down. Car accident 3 years ago. But the family's rich. We stand to gain 600 grand if you marry her and keep up appearances for a few years. After that, you can divorce or do whatever the hell you want." I stood in my kitchen gripping the counter so hard I thought it might crack. He continued, "You always thought you were too good for this family, didn't you? Well, this is your chance to prove it. Step up. Help us for once." I told him to go to hell. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I got a visit at work. My manager called me into the lobby where a man in a tailored gray suit introduced himself as Vincent Quinn, Thalassa's uncle. He was polite, calculated, and disgustingly calm. He said Thalassa's father was dying. The family wanted to ensure her future. They needed someone who would agree to marry her in name only. No obligations beyond public appearances and a set of prearranged events for 2 years. In return, I'd receive $100,000 personally, and my parents would get the remainder. I asked why me. He smiled and said, "Your father insisted you were trustworthy, that despite your differences, you were dependable when it counted." I didn't respond. That night, I drank half a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving since graduation. I stared at my ceiling and thought about the people I used to be responsible for. Corwin, now drifting between part-time jobs. Isolde, gone before she could dream. Elowen, who once believed I deserved peace. And me, sitting alone in a city that didn't know my name. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I wanted to prove, once and for all, that nothing my parents threw at me could break me anymore. I signed the contract a week later. The wedding was scheduled 6 weeks out. A week later. The wedding was scheduled 6 weeks out. I met Thalassa only once before the ceremony. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe in Spokane. She wore a gray sweater, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, her wheelchair as sleek and silent as her expression. She didn't smile, didn't look sad either. Just studied me like I was a puzzle missing half the pieces. I introduced myself. She said, "This isn't a love story, Cashin. Let's keep it that way." I nodded. Something in her voice made me respect her, even before I knew her. The ceremony was simple. 2 witnesses, a justice of the peace, and silence. My parents didn't attend. Hers sat in the back row, eyes glassy with grief. Her father looked like a man whose body had already given up. After the rings were exchanged, we signed the paperwork, shook hands with the lawyers, and left in separate cars. The contract said we would live together, not out of affection, but convenience. Appearances had to be maintained. So I moved into her house outside Walla Walla, stone driveway, tall hedges, rooms that echoed. She had a caregiver named Maris who handled most of her physical needs. I took the upstairs guest room. We barely spoke. Days passed like wind through dead leaves, present but empty. I went to work remotely. She read, mostly. Astronomy books, oddly enough. She had a telescope on the back patio and spent hours staring at the night sky. Once, I asked her what she was looking for. She replied, "Something constant." I said nothing. Neither did she. It became routine. Cold dinners, quiet mornings, the occasional staged photo for her family's estate manager. I thought I could handle it. Thought I could treat it like an extended job assignment. But something in the silence started to feel familiar. The kind of quiet I remembered from childhood, not peaceful, but oppressive. I stayed upstairs, working remotely for Terra Nova, sending reports, sitting through endless Zoom calls, and trying not to wonder what the hell I'd agreed to. But slowly, the silence started to shift. It began with small things, like the way she brewed 2 cups of coffee each morning and left one on the counter, never asking if I wanted it, never commenting when I drank it anyway. Or how she reorganized the fridge so my groceries were kept separate but labeled neatly. Or the time she knocked softly on my office door to slide in a newspaper article about a stream restoration project she thought I might appreciate. There were no grand gestures, just quiet signals that said, "I see you." One rainy Saturday, I came downstairs to find her struggling to adjust the mount of her telescope on the patio. Maris was out that weekend, and I guess pride kept her from calling for help. I walked over, wordlessly bent down, and resecured the bolt she couldn't reach. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she asked, "Do you believe in multiverses?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Like alternate timelines?" I asked. She nodded. "Where versions of ourselves made different choices, lived different lives. I like thinking one of those versions is walking again. Running, maybe. Dancing." Her voice didn't crack, but I heard the weight beneath it. I didn't have an answer, so I simply said, "Maybe he's not married to a stranger either." That made her smile. A small, private smile that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. After that, things thawed further. We started having dinner together, not every night, but often enough that it felt less like convenience and more like habit. She told me about her life before the accident, horseback riding competitions, hiking trips with her father, a research grant she'd almost accepted to study starlight pollution in South America. I told her about Brickmill, about Isolde, about the weight of being the eldest in a house that demanded too much and gave too little. She didn't pity me, and when I paused too long, she waited. There's a strange intimacy in silence when it's earned. Thalassa didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to rescue her. We just let each other be. One evening, during a particularly vicious thunderstorm, the power went out. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, but Thalassa had already lit 3 candles around the living room. I sat across from her, watching the shadows flicker across her face. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like without the accident?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, eyes steady. "All the time. But I also wonder who I would have missed meeting." It was the first time I realized she was choosing to stay in this life, not just enduring it. She could have resented everything: me, the arrangement, the chair, the quiet, but she didn't. She moved through her world with intentional grace, as if she'd decided long ago that bitterness wasn't worth carrying. That night, I found myself lingering after she went to bed, sitting in the living room long after the candles had burned down. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't plan to care. This was supposed to be transactional. 2 years, then freedom. But the lines were blurring, not with grand romantic moments or cliches, but with small, undeniable truths. Like how I missed our conversations when she spent a day away with her physical therapist, or how her laugh had begun to occupy space in my memory, softening the edges of my harsher thoughts. I started noticing details: the way she tapped her thumb against the chair arm when thinking, how she hummed Debussy under her breath when concentrating, how her scent, citrus and lavender, lingered on the throw pillows. I started leaving the office door open. She started asking me to join her on the patio when the stars were clear. One night, wrapped in a blanket beside her telescope, she pointed to a cluster of stars and said, "That's where I go when this world feels too heavy." I looked up, not at the stars but at her, and said, "I think I've been looking at the ground too long." She turned her head, met my gaze, and for the first time, didn't look away. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch. But something passed between us, a shift as real as gravity. The following week, I rearranged my schedule so I could attend one of her research talks. She spoke about disabled representation in environmental studies, and I watched as a room full of professionals leaned in, captivated not by sympathy, but by brilliance. When we got home, she asked why I came. I shrugged and said, "Because you matter." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she said, "No one's ever said that to me without expecting something back." Not an email, not a phone call. An actual envelope slid under our front gate with no return address, just my name written in my mother's handwriting. I opened it out of morbid curiosity. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the contract I had signed, annotated, with dollar figures underlined in red ink and a handwritten note at the bottom. 600 grand to marry a cripple. Guess you got what you wanted, huh? No signature. Just venom. I crumpled it and threw it in the trash, but the words clung to me like ash. The next day, I got a voicemail from Ronan. "Saw the car you drive now. Real nice. Guess the loss's money goes far. You should swing by sometime. Your brother could use some help." I didn't respond. I hadn't spoken to Corwin in months. The last I heard, he dropped out of art school and was couch surfing in Boise. The guilt came fast, but I buried it. I had enough ghosts. But then Thalassa found the letter. She didn't say anything at first, just left it on the kitchen counter with a sticky note. "Do I need to worry?" I stared at her handwriting for a long time. I could lie. I could tell her it was nothing, a cruel prank, some noise from a family I no longer claimed. But I didn't. I told her the truth. Every word. About my parents' proposal, about the money they were promised, about the reason I agreed to this arrangement in the first place. She listened, her face unreadable. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "So I was the last move on your chessboard." It wasn't a question. I told her it had started that way, but it wasn't that anymore. She looked at me, eyes hard but not cruel, and asked, "And if the contract ended tomorrow, what would you do?" I didn't answer. I didn't have one. She wheeled herself away, closing her door softly. That night, the house felt like a cage again. All the warmth we'd built disappeared, replaced by cold air and thicker silences. I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk, circled the block 3 times, and ended up at a diner on the highway. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and stared at the laminated menu until my eyes burned. When I came home, she was in the conservatory, her telescope packed away. She said without looking up, "My father died this morning." My heart cracked. I moved toward her instinctively, but she held up a hand. He left everything to me. All of it. But there's a catch. I waited. My Uncle Vincent is contesting the will. He says our marriage was fraudulent, that I was coerced, and he's using the contract as evidence. I blinked, stunned. But we followed every rule. Photos, events, statements. But your parents leaked the contract to him. My jaw clenched so hard, I thought I might shatter a tooth. They what? She finally looked at me. They gave him everything. Probably for a cut. I was shaking. With rage, with shame, with the weight of every wound I'd thought I'd left behind. I'll talk to him, I said. I'll fix it. She laughed, dry, tired. You don't get to fix this, Cassian. You built it. That was the last thing she said to me that day. I called my parents. No answer. I drove to their house in Brickmill the next morning, against every instinct, every promise I'd made myself. The place looked worse than I remembered. Peeling paint, broken windows, a truck on cinder blocks in the yard. Ronan answered the door holding a beer. Well, look who remembered he has a family, he said. I pushed past him. Meredith was asleep on the couch. The house smelled like mold and regret. You gave Quinn's lawyers our contract? I asked. Ronan shrugged. They paid well. You never shared your cut. Figured we deserved something. I stared at him, disbelief curdling into disgust. You just blew up my life for money? He looked at me with something like pride. You think you're better than us. You never were. I left without another word. Drove 5 hours back in silence, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I walked into the house, Thalasso was in the dining room with her legal team. She didn't look up. Her lawyer told me they'd filed an injunction. The case would take months. Until then, everything we had, our home, our finances, our fragile trust, was suspended in legal limbo. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I wanted to leave, but because she needed space. As I turned to go, she said, "Do you ever love me?" I stopped, heart in my throat. I don't know what love is, I said. But I know you're the first person who ever made me want to learn. She didn't reply, just turned away. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't ready to explain how I'd turned a contract marriage into something real, only to destroy it by dragging my poisoned roots into her life. Every few days, I'd get updates from her legal team through email. Vincent Quinn had filed a full suit to challenge the will, citing undue influence, emotional manipulation, and fraudulent intent. He submitted copies of the marriage contract, highlighted every clause that could make us look dishonest, and even included surveillance footage of me entering and exiting the Quinn estate on dates suspiciously close to our legal deadlines. They were twisting reality into a weapon, and I was the blade. My guilt consumed me. I started skipping meals, missing sleep. I watched Thalassa's TED Talk online 5 times in one night, memorizing the cadence of her voice, the way her hands moved when she spoke passionately about disability equity in ecological spaces. The comments were flooded with admiration. She was everything I wasn't, graceful under pressure, composed, unapologetically brilliant. I hadn't just failed her, I'd failed everything she believed in. One night, nearly a month after I'd left, I got a text from Corwin. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Part of me still loved my brother, still remembered the little boy who used to draw dinosaurs on my math homework. But the man he'd become had stood by while our parents sold me off like a pawn. I didn't owe him forgiveness. I didn't even owe him a reply. I drove past the Quinn estate once, just once. I stayed in the car, engine running, headlights off. From the road, I could see the upstairs window glowing faintly. Her room. I wondered if she was reading, if she was thinking about me, if she hated me. I wanted to knock on the door, to beg for another chance, but I knew showing up uninvited would be cruel. She deserved control. She deserved space. So I drove away. The next week, her lawyer reached out directly. He asked if I would provide a sworn statement supporting her position that our marriage, though unconventional in origin, had become a genuine partnership. I said yes without hesitation. The deposition took place in a sterile office downtown. I sat under fluorescent lights while a notary recorded my every word. I told them the truth. I told them that I entered the arrangement out of desperation, out of obligation, but that what developed between us was never part of the plan. I told them about the telescope, about the coffee, about the way Thalassa made the silence in my life feel like comfort instead of punishment. When it was over, the lawyer nodded and said, "She didn't doubt you. She just needed to know you were willing to fight." That night, I went back to the motel and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but release. Someone still believed in me. Someone I had nearly lost. I didn't expect her to forgive me. I wasn't doing it for redemption. I was doing it because she mattered, because she had become the only real thing in a life I had built on survival and silence. Days passed, then a week, then another. I heard nothing. I didn't push. I figured silence was my answer. And then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, I opened the door of my motel room and found an envelope on the ground. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from her. "Cassian, I read your deposition. Thank you. I didn't need it to win the case. I needed it to know the man I let into my life was still there, beneath the history, the pain, the fear. You hurt me, but I've been hurt before. What matters is what you do now. There's a bench in the greenhouse. Friday, noon. If you're still who I think you are, you'll be there." I read the letter 6 times before folding it carefully and placing it in my wallet. Friday couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I wore the only blazer I owned and drove through the rain with hands trembling on the wheel. The greenhouse was quiet when I arrived. Warm, humid. The air smelled of earth and rosemary. She was already there, seated at the bench, a small book open in her lap. She didn't look up when I entered, just turned a page. I sat beside her without a word. For 5 long minutes, we just breathed. Finally, she said, "Do you love me, Cassian?" My throat tightened. We had dinner together twice a week. We talked more often now, sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep and I couldn't stop thinking. We didn't call it anything, not a marriage, not a romance, not a second chance. But it was something real. The lawsuit dragged on, as lawsuits do. Vincent Quinn fought like a man drowning, flailing wildly, throwing every accusation he could think of at the walls to see what might stick. Fraud, coercion, elder abuse. None of it held. Thalassa's lawyers were sharp, and my deposition had helped. But then something new entered the picture, something we didn't see coming. A medical report. At first, it looked routine. Part of the estate documentation, verifying Thalassa's disability status for legal consideration. But buried in the file was a name neither of us recognized. Dr. Caleb Reinhardt, a neurologist from Montana who had examined Thalassa 2 years ago. According to the report, her condition wasn't permanent. She had been misdiagnosed. There was a strong chance, with targeted physical therapy and nerve stimulation treatment, that she could walk again. I read it twice, then looked up at her. She sat across from me, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the document like it had insulted her. "You knew," I said quietly. She didn't blink. Yes. The silence between us was a cold knife. I set the paper down slowly. "Why didn't you say anything?" She turned away, wheeled to the window, stared out at the hedges. "Because it's not that simple. Because everyone always wants me to be something I'm not. First a daughter who wouldn't disappoint. Then a wife in name only. Then a symbol for a foundation. I didn't want to add miracle recovery to the list." Her voice cracked, just a little. "And because I was afraid." I approached carefully, crouched beside her chair. Afraid of what? She looked down at me, and for once, the calm cracked. That if I could walk again, I'd lose the only reason people ever took me seriously. That I'd be reduced to just another woman in a fancy house, not someone who overcame anything. I didn't know what to say. Not because I didn't care, but because I did so much that it made my chest ache. "Thalassa, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Not because of your condition, because of your heart, your mind, your fire. That doesn't change if you stand on 2 legs." She looked at me, really looked, And for a long moment, I thought she might cry. Not because of the lawsuit, not because of anyone else, because I want to know if it's possible. So we began, slowly, discreetly. She didn't want the staff to know at first. Only her lead physical therapist and a neurologist she trusted were in on the plan. The treatments were painful. The progress was glacial. But she committed. Every morning, I helped her into the harness. Every night, I iced her joints and massaged her calves. We didn't talk about the contract anymore, or the money, or the legal war waiting outside the estate. We talked about constellations and coffee beans and where we might travel if she could walk through an airport on her own 2 feet. We started laughing again. We started falling asleep on the same couch, heads leaning into each other without thinking. We started becoming something that didn't need a label. And then, just as hope began to feel safe again, the past came knocking one more time. It was Corwin. He showed up at the estate gate one afternoon looking like he hadn't slept in days. I hadn't seen him since the confrontation with our father. He looked thinner, haunted. I almost didn't open the gate. But something, guilt, love, blood, made me press the intercom. "What do you want?" I asked. His voice cracked. "To tell you the truth." He came in. We sat in the conservatory, the same place where Thalassa had once accused me of playing chess with her life. Now I was the one listening for moves I didn't see coming. Corwin spoke slowly. "I didn't know what Dad was planning. I swear, but I found out something you need to hear." He handed me a USB drive. I stared at it. "What's this?" "Phone recordings, voicemails, conversations." Dad kept records, always paranoid. After the lawsuit got messy, I started digging, and I found something worse than money. My stomach turned. "Worse how?" He looked me in the eye. "They planned it. The contract, the setup, all of it. But not just to get money. To sabotage Thalassa. Vincent and Dad were working together from the start." I felt like the floor disappeared. "Why?" "Because she was going to cut Vincent out of the foundation. Because she was becoming too powerful. And because Dad, he thought you owed him everything." She was walking again, barely, slowly, holding onto parallel bars or using crutches, but she was walking. Every step she took, every grimace of effort, made my chest ache in a way I didn't know how to name. Pride, yes, but also fear. Because I realized something I hadn't faced before. I was falling in love with a woman who didn't need me to carry her anymore. And I didn't know who I was without someone to carry. We celebrated small victories. She took 3 unassisted steps across the conservatory. She laughed without wincing. She danced, or what resembled a slow shuffle, to music in the kitchen while I held her waist and pretended not to cry. She kept the chair, though. "It's part of me," she told me. "I choose how and when I use it now." I admired that. Her agency, her defiance of narrative. No one could reduce her to an inspiration story, not unless she allowed it. But with healing came attention. The foundation wanted her back in the public eye. Speaking engagements, interviews, sponsorships. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who beat paralysis and corruption in one breath. Thalassa resisted at first, but eventually she agreed to a panel in New York about disability and power. I went with her. It was our first time flying together. She walked through the airport gate on her own legs, a cane in hand, head held high. People stared, whispered, some cheered, some cried. She took it all in stride. That night, after the panel, we went back to the hotel suite, exhausted and overwhelmed. I poured us both a drink, and we sat on the couch, shoes off, tie loosened. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I don't think I know how to live without fighting something." I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then let's find something worth fighting for." That's when I decided to propose. Not because of guilt or contracts or obligation, but because I couldn't imagine my life without her. I spent weeks planning it, quietly, thoughtfully, picking out a ring that wasn't flashy but had meaning. A white opal in the center, her favorite stone, surrounded by a halo of recycled emeralds. Sustainable, unique, beautiful, just like her. The night I planned to ask, we were back in Walla Walla, watching the stars through her telescope. She was telling me about a binary system she'd discovered as a teen when I got down on one knee, not for theatrics, but because it felt right. She turned to look at me, eyes wide. I didn't launch into a speech. I just said, there's no contract, no performance. Just this, you and me. Will you marry me for real this time? She stared at me for a long moment, lips trembling, then whispered, yes, God, yes. I slipped the ring on her finger, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. We didn't rush the wedding. We didn't announce it with fanfare. We told her closest friends, a few trusted family members, and no one from my side. Corwin was invited. He didn't come, but he sent a painting, an abstract swirl of dark and light, captioned, Becoming. The ceremony was small, in the greenhouse. Maris officiated. Thalassa wore a dress that shimmered like starlight. I wore a charcoal suit with the opal cufflinks she'd given me the week before. We wrote our own vows. Mine were messy and halting, full of tears I didn't try to hide. Hers were quiet and sharp, like poetry. You found me in the silence, she said, and taught me how to speak again. We kissed, and the world fell away. We honeymooned in Oregon in a cabin tucked deep in the pines. No reception, no press, just us, hiking slowly, cooking over fire, lying under constellations she named from memory. I thought that was the twist, the unexpected joy, the healing, the real love born from a fabricated lie. But the real twist was still waiting. It came 6 weeks after we returned home, in the form of a phone call from Thalassa's personal physician. I answered, expecting a routine update about her progress. Instead, he asked to speak to both of us. We sat in the living room, hands clasped. As he delivered the news, Thalassa was pregnant. I didn't speak at first. Neither did she. The silence stretched, not from fear, but from disbelief. Every evening, I'd catch her sitting by the window, hand resting on her stomach, writing carefully in a leather-bound notebook she never let out of her sight. We were planning everything in quiet. I began researching parenting books. She called her doctor weekly, asking a million questions, some scientific, some emotional. We cried when we heard the heartbeat. We laughed when the baby first kicked. We started to believe in joy again. But joy, for people like us, never arrives alone. It carries shadows. The first crack came when someone in the clinic leaked the pregnancy. We weren't sure who. Thalassa had only told her physician and her physical therapist. I hadn't told anyone. And yet, the news hit the internet like wildfire. Heiress who faked marriage now pregnant by same man was the headline on one tabloid site. Another ran a photo of us entering the clinic with the caption, "From contract to crib." The implication was clear, that the pregnancy was either manufactured, part of some elaborate PR stunt, or worse, a ploy to secure permanent claim to the Quinn estate. Her phone didn't stop buzzing for 3 days. Reporters camped outside the estate. Drones hovered near the greenhouse. We installed blackout curtains. We shut down our social media accounts. Maris, bless her, chased one photographer off the lawn with a broom. But the pressure didn't stop. Vincent's allies, the few who hadn't backed away after the lawsuit, resurfaced with new claims. This changes the terms of the estate, one lawyer argued in a leaked brief. A child conceived under fraudulent marital conditions introduces new heirs under false pretenses. It was nonsense, legally speaking. But it was fuel for the media. Suddenly, our private life was on trial again. Thalassa withdrew. She stopped going to therapy sessions. She canceled 2 public appearances. She stopped writing. And I started to fear her silence again. We barely spoke for 3 days. She didn't eat, didn't sleep. I tried to help, but every time I asked what she needed, she just said, for it all to stop. Then one night, I found her in the conservatory, curled on the sofa, shaking. I sat beside her, wrapped my arms around her, and waited. After a while, she whispered, "What if I'm not strong enough?" I pressed my forehead to hers. "Then I'll carry the weight until you are." That's what love is, Thalassa. Not a perfect balance, but taking turns with the burden. She wept quietly, the way people do when they've been holding in pain too long. When she finally slept, I stayed up all night reading every document we had, every clause in the estate, every case precedent that might shield us from this new wave. I called her legal team at dawn. We filed emergency injunctions, cease and desist letters, privacy violations, but in the court of public opinion, we were already guilty. They called me a con man, said I trapped her, said the baby was a bargaining chip, that I'd manipulated her fragile mental state, exploited her disability, groomed her during a time of vulnerability. It was worse than the lawsuit because this time it wasn't just lawyers or documents, it was strangers. It was voices from every corner of the internet, slicing us with speculation. Thalassa's mother, who had been distant throughout our marriage, finally called. She wasn't angry, just worried. "You know what this world does to women like you," she said. "It builds them up only to tear them down the second they show weakness." Thalassa listened, said nothing, then hung up and cried for an hour. I offered to move us somewhere remote, take time away, Europe, Alaska, anywhere we could breathe. But she said no. We stay. We don't let them chase us out of our own home. I admired her resolve, but I could see the cracks forming again. So I made a decision. I contacted an independent journalist, someone Thalassa had once worked with during a foundation grant. Her name was Petra. Trusted, honest, not interested in scandal, only truth. I invited her to our home. I didn't tell Thalassa until the morning of. She was furious. "You invited the press into our house?" she snapped. I nodded. I invited the truth. Because if we hide, we look guilty. If we speak, we take the narrative back. It took convincing, hours of tense debate, but eventually she agreed. Petra arrived with a small crew. No lights, no makeup, no scripts. Just 2 chairs in the conservatory and a voice recorder. The interview lasted 3 hours. We answered everything, from the contract marriage to the betrayal, from the lawsuit to the pregnancy. We cried. We laughed. We told the truth. The real truth. Petra published the article in a long-form piece titled "Contract Love," the story behind the headline. It went viral, not in a scandal sense, but in the human one. People saw us not as caricatures, but as 2 damaged people trying to build something real. And for the first time since the chaos began, the tide turned. Sympathy replaced cynicism. Support replaced hate. Offers poured in from advocacy groups, media outlets, even a book agent. We declined most of it. Thalassa accepted one invitation to speak on a podcast about healing after public betrayal. Her voice was clear, strong, alive. And in that moment, I remembered why I fell in love with her. It's been 3 years since the world first learned our names, since headlines turned our lives into a spectacle, and the truth became something we had to fight for instead of simply live. And now, as I sit on the edge of the same greenhouse bench where Thalassa once asked if I loved her, I find myself staring out over the garden we built, both literally and figuratively, wondering how it all happened. Or rather, why? The how is easier to answer. The how was desperation, survival, and mistakes made under pressure. It was contracts signed in fear and loyalty misplaced in blood. It was trauma wrapped in ambition and 2 people forced into a lie that somehow gave way to something more honest than either had ever known. But the why, that's where the meaning lives. That's what I've spent these last few years unraveling. The garden outside is blooming. Lavender, of course, Thalassa's favorite. Tomato vines climbing along a trellis. Bees dancing between peonies. Our daughter, whom we named Isolde after my sister, toddles through the garden in boots too big for her, chasing a butterfly with the kind of laughter that fills a man's soul. She looks like her mother, sharp eyes, soft smile, but she carries a wildness in her step that is entirely her own. Thalassa stands nearby, no cane today, hands in her pockets, watching our daughter with a quiet smile. Her recovery was slow, but steady. She doesn't talk much about the chair anymore. It's still part of our lives, in the house, used when needed, never hidden. But these days, it feels less like a symbol and more like a tool, one of many that helped us get here. We both work less now. I still consult for Terra Nova, but I turned down a promotion that would have meant longer hours and more travel. I didn't need the title. I needed time with my family, in my home, in the world we chose instead of the one that was forced upon us. Thalassa writes full-time now. Her first book, a memoir about resilience, identity, and the complexity of living publicly, hit the bestseller list. She's working on a second, and some nights I find her up late in the conservatory, laptop open, candle lit, her fingers tapping softly like rain on glass. We don't go out much. Fame is a strange thing, fickle and fleeting. Most people have moved on. The scandal is old news. The name Quinn now belongs to Thalassa in every way that matters. The foundation has flourished under her leadership, launching initiatives in accessible environmental education and disaster relief. And our lives, once defined by secrets, now feel whole. But still, I come back to the why. Why did two broken people, me, the kid from Brickmill who never believed he deserved anything good, and her, the woman groomed by legacy and nearly broken by betrayal, have to meet the way we did? Why did we need to suffer to learn what love meant? And I think the answer is this, because sometimes the lie is what leads you to the truth. Because the things we run from, pain, shame, failure, are often the things that push us toward what matters. I never would have met Thalassa without that contract. I never would have stayed if not for her grace. And I never would have become a father, a partner, a man I can finally look in the mirror and recognize, if not for everything we endured. Love, I've learned, isn't about rescue or perfection. It's not about fixing each other or healing in synchronized steps. It's about standing beside someone in the wreckage, choosing to build, brick by brick, even when the foundation is shaky. It's about listening when it's hard, staying when it's easier to leave, and believing in a future neither of you can see yet. The past hasn't disappeared. My parents are gone now. My father died in prison of liver failure. My mother passed not long after, alone, bitter to the end. I didn't attend the funerals. Corwin and I speak sometimes, through postcards mostly. He's in Santa Fe now, painting. He says he's found peace. I hope he has. We carry our scars like rings on a tree, reminders of storms survived. But they don't define us anymore. They don't steer the ship. When Isalde asks one day how her parents met, I'll tell her the truth, not the edited version. I'll tell her that her mother and I were broken, scared, and selfish once. That we made choices out of pain, and that those choices led to something miraculous. I'll tell her that people aren't either good or bad, they're just people. That love isn't always born from purity. Sometimes it grows from mess, from failure, from the ashes of what was supposed to work but didn't. And I'll tell her that the most important thing in this life isn't how you begin, it's how you choose to continue. I stand now, walking across the stone path to where Thalassa kneels beside our daughter, helping her pick lavender. She looks up, brushes hair from her face, and smiles like she did the night I proposed. No fear, no hesitation, just knowing. I crouch beside her, kiss her shoulder, and she leans into me. "What were you thinking about?" she asks softly. I look at her, at our child, at the life we made. Just the why of it all. She nods. And I take her hand. Because we needed to break to find the pieces that fit. And in that moment, everything makes sense. The end. Hey, thanks for staying with me through this story. If you felt something, anything, while hearing what I've been through, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribed. It means a lot more than you know. And honestly, I want to hear from you. What part of the story stuck with you the most? Did anything surprise you? Let me know in the comments. I'm also curious, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. I'd love to see how far this story has reached. Thanks again for spending this time with me.